Students increasingly expect institutions to help them make sense of complexity, not simply providing access to information. Information is abundant, but guidance, that's where I think institutions can really succeed.
Most colleges would say they're personalizing the student experience. But if personalization is just adding someone's first name to an email or showing them content based on a program they're interested in, are we really meeting the expectations students have today? My guest today believes the answer is often no. Nathan Monk is the co-founder of Prospectus Plus and Smile, and he's spent nearly 2 decades helping organizations create better digital experiences. He's also presenting a session at EduWeb that asks a simple but provocative question. Is your marketing actually personalized, or does it just look personalized? Nathan, welcome to the application.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I have a question to sort of set the stage for our conversation today, and it's, what's one example of personalization from outside higher ed that you think enrollment marketers should be jealous of?
Well, I suppose that most people would probably expect me to say Spotify, TikTok, maybe
Netflix.
even ChatGPT. Yeah, and they're all great examples. They do an incredible job of learning from behavior and adapting experiences around their preferences. But the example I actually keep coming back to is Google Maps. And the reason is that Google Maps doesn't just personalize content, it personalizes navigation. It understands where you are, what you're trying to get to, the constraints you're working with, and the different routes that are available to you. And then it helps you to make a confident decision about what to do next. And I think that's where higher ed has maybe gotten personalization wrong sometimes. We've spent a lot of time focusing on personalizing communications when what students really need, I think, is personalized decision support.
That being said, let's define personalization then for everyone who is listening. What's your definition of personalization, and what does higher ed keep getting wrong about it?
I think that higher education has confused personalization with relevance. For years, we've focused on making communications more relevant by segmenting audiences, inserting course program interests into emails, and building increasingly sophisticated nurture journeys. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it's not really personalization. If I receive an email because I download a business management prospectus and the email talks about business management, that's not especially personal, it's just relevant. So the bigger challenge is that institutions have personalized the message without personalizing the experience. Students are expected to navigate hundreds of program pages, compare complex options, understand finance, interpret entry requirements, evaluate outcomes, and then make one of the biggest decisions of their lives. We've made the communication more relevant, but we've left the decision-making process largely unchanged. And so what I think that we're missing is that the goal of personalization shouldn't be just to simply increase engagement. It should be to increase that decision confidence, so that when a student finishes an interaction, they're not saying, oh, that was personalized. They should really finish it thinking, oh, well, that's really helped me to understand my options here. And that's where I think that the next big evolution lies.
So something can be technically personalized,
yeah,
but not actually be helpful or make a student feel seen.
Exactly that. And I think that that's the real shift for universities to unlock, is about making it truly useful in making a decision.
And it's really important that the usefulness and just feeling seen. And I guess to me, I think about personal versus personalized. Something's personal to me, it's doing what you're saying. It's adding the support factor. It's making someone feel connected, feel like they belong. Personalized to me feels like a mail merge.
Yeah,
that's been around forever.
Exactly. And I think that the difference is one that reflects data, whilst the other one demonstrates understanding.
Right.
Technically personalized communication would say something like, we know something about you. Maybe it mentions the program that they've looked at or the event that they've attended. And like you say, that's really useful, but it's fairly low bar, if we're honest. Communication that makes someone feel seen would say something like, we understand what you're trying to achieve, what might be worrying you, and what could help you to move forward. Now, that's a completely different experience. We could say things like, as someone interested in psychology, we thought that you'd like to know about our psychology degree. A student reads that and thinks, well, yes, obviously I downloaded the psychology prospectus, but communication that might make them feel seen would be something more aligned to many students considering psychology tell us that they're trying to balance their interest in the subject with questions about career prospects. And here's how students typically think about that decision. We're no longer responding to just a simple data point. We're actually responding to human concern. And that, I think, is where the real opportunity lies.
Well, and the questions that we know that they have. And
Yeah.
so you're answering the questions that you know are on their mind. You're surfacing them, and you're going at it really directly. So yeah, I love
Precisely.
that.
I often say that the goal shouldn't be to make students think they know me. The goal should actually be to make students think they understand me.
I'm going to guess this connects into behavioral science, because I know that's part of the session that you're doing at EduWeb is the behavioral science behind personalization. So what does the research tell us about what actually makes people feel understood?
One of the most interesting things I've learned from our research is that people don't necessarily feel understood when an institution knows more about them. They feel understood when an institution responds to what's actually on their mind. We've seen it repeatedly at Prospectus Plus. For example, in our annual Secret Shopper research, we review view books from institutions across the sector here in the UK. And what we found was that 96.5% of the examples we analysed, personalisation simply was not a part of that strategy whatsoever. In fact, only around 3% showed any meaningful attempt to personalise the experience. To me, that's a huge missed opportunity, because we also know from the research that students are actively telling us that they want something different. We did a big piece of research with a huge body over here called UCAS, and as part of that, 77% of students said that they would prefer a personalised view book, and 60% said that they would willingly share their contact details to receive one.
To get one. Interesting.
That's an important finding, right? Because students aren't rejecting personalization, they're rejecting generic communication. We see evidence that trust plays a major role whether people feel understood. We know that there's big kind of social avenues, but we saw that when they're speaking with advisors, for example, 96% of students rated those interactions as good or excellent. But when we followed up later, satisfaction with the information that they received and then took home, that dropped significantly. And in fact, only 26% described themselves as very satisfied with the follow-up communications. And I think that that's massively revealing, because the human interaction made students feel understood, but the follow-up communications often didn't.
You've got me thinking about, I'm picturing these view books now, personalized to the student and really answering what's on their minds, not just inserting their name or maybe the school that they're coming from or something like that. And you're talking about it being such a human experience, but it has to be technology that's being used to actually create that human experience. Am I right?
One of the big themes that I always come back to is how technology supports humans. There's a lot of chat at the moment about AI and what that's going to do and replacing jobs and all this sort of stuff. But actually, I see technology as a partnership, right? And it helps to improve those human conversations. I'm always just blown away when I watch student recruitment advisors, because it feels like they know everything, right? And I spoke to a lot of students throughout my research, and that's when it feels magical, because a student goes up to an advisor, asks them something, gosh, they know the answer, they told me. But actually you see it all crumble when they ask them a question that they don't quite know. And that, I think, is where that technology piece needs to slot in, because we can't reasonably expect these people to know every last detail about our institutions. It's impossible. So instead, if we can give them some sort of companion that allows them to do their best work, it has the information that's relevant not only to the student, but to the advisor dealing with that conversation. That, for me, is where I think technology can be so powerful in aiding those human interactions as well as the follow-on interactions too.
What a great idea. I've always been a proponent of the best answers I don't know, because then you can follow up in a really personal way. But oftentimes not having the answer, it impacts the advisor, or even picture a student tour guide. It actually almost makes them freeze up that they don't have an answer, right? It makes them feel anxious, makes them feel stressed, and having a technology tool that actually was available to help with that would help in those moments for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what the sort of stuff that we've been working on. When we first started with our journey, we thought that creating Prospectus Plus, digital view books would all be about just digital publishing, but we quickly learned it was anything but that. And actually it was about creating these tools and utilities that can empower these really high value moments in the student recruitment journey.
So if a student feels empowered and they feel understood, how does that then show up in their decision making when it comes to college?
I think that sometimes institutions underestimate the emotional side of decision making, but I don't think the answer is that students are emotional rather than rational. I think in reality they're both. What's perhaps more interesting is understanding when each of those two sides of the coin becomes more important. I've spent much of my career helping universities understand how students make their decisions, including working on, for UCAS, that body that I talked about. We helped build one of the most widely used university admissions tools for them, and it helped students to understand the real grade entry points for universities. Now, millions of students have used that platform to understand the grades that institutions are likely to accept, and that's a very highly rational behavior. Students absolutely care about data at certain points. They want to know when they're going to get in. They want to understand the costs. The mistake is, I think, assuming that that's the whole story. And what I've observed is that the balance shifts throughout the student recruitment journey. At the beginning of the process, students are often making surprisingly emotional judgments. They're responding to first impressions. They're influenced by families, friends, social media, the advisors that they're speaking to. And they're asking questions like, can I see myself here? Do people like me belong here? And I think that really speaks to your point here around, what effect does it have when somebody feels seen? I think it nurtures that emotional response of, yes, I can see myself here. People like me do belong here. This feels like the right place for me. And that might naturally lead them on to a kind of more rational part of the recruitment cycle where they start to become a little bit more analytical and they start comparing program details. So it literally nurtures people through the process, often trying to nudge them towards ultimately application.
Well, and trust must play a big role in this time period, right? Because when they emotionally feel understood or they feel seen, and then they can start to trust those rational pieces that they're looking at too. I have to imagine that trust and feeling understood are really connected.
Yeah, and I think engagement is often mistaken for progress. Just because a student opens an email or attends an event, clicks a link, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're moving closer to actually making a decision. What really matters is whether those interactions are, as you say, building trust. And for me, trust is what gives engagement meaning. Without trust, engagement is just activity. With trust, engagement becomes progress. There was a really interesting report here in the UK recently. Despite all of the attention that we give to social media, influencers, AI, third-party platforms, students still overwhelmingly begin their research on institutional websites. That's really significant, right? Because what it tells us is that universities occupy a uniquely trusted position from the get-go. They don't start by asking strangers what a university is like. They start by asking the university itself. And of course, they'll go on to validate what they find. They'll look at social media, talk to students, but their first instinct is to go directly to the source. That is a remarkable position for a university to be in. in many ways, universities begin with trust. The challenge is actually
Keeping
how
it.
do we keep it?
Yeah. So what are some of the things that we're doing then, perhaps unintentionally, that erode trust, that get in the way of us keeping trust through that whole experience?
You know, I don't think most trust is lost through major mistakes. I actually think that it
We'd
would be
know
lost.
those, I would hope.
Yeah. uh, I think that it's lost through small disappointments, tiny moments where the experience doesn't quite live up to the expectation that's being created, rightly or wrongly, in their head. What makes this particularly challenging, I think, in HE is that many of those disappointments are driven by inertia rather than intent. We're a cyclical industry. Every year we run recruitment campaigns and create view books, update websites, all that stuff. The danger is we start doing these things because we've always done them rather than because they're still the best experience for students. Meanwhile, students don't experience comms as separate channels or separate teams. They experience one institution, one brand, one journey. And every interaction either reinforces trust or weakens it. Now, if I was to bring it to my own pet peeve, a good example is the digital view book. The most common format in higher education for a digital view book is still the PDF. Now,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I get why they're easy to create, they're easy to distribute, but they're not necessarily easy to use, particularly on a mobile device. And that's where, for me, trust really starts becoming quite interesting, because it's not that you open a PDF and you immediately lose faith in an institution, but it is a small disappointment when they have to zoom in, struggle to navigate, can't find what they're looking for.
And none of the other brands that they've been experiencing and interacting with their whole lives are sending them a PDF like this. And we're trying to position higher ed as very future forward, right? And then we send them a PDF. So they might not consciously think those things, right? But in the subconscious, I just had a quote unquote digital experience that was not like all of the other digital experience that I have in my life. So they might not acknowledge it or state it, but it's got to be there.
And it's so easy for us to kind of get caught up in. Students aren't comparing us to what universities did 5 years ago. They're comparing us to the best digital experiences that they had this morning. And every small disappointment makes that comparison just a little bit harder to win.
So, here we are applauding ourselves for these strides that we're making, which is really just playing catch up to what everyone else is and our own experience as consumers, right? We applaud ourselves for these incremental gains in this space of personalization and digital experience when they're like light years ahead of where we're landing. Yeah, so there's a disconnect there.
Massive. I mean, it's not even that they expect universities to behave like Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, TikTok. I actually think that's a bit of a misconception. Students understand that choosing a university is fundamentally different from choosing a film to watch. But what they do expect, however, is that same level of thoughtfulness that those brands bring to the table. They expect institutions to respect their time, easy to find, feel connected, and they expect them to remember what they've already told them. And that is a subtle but important distinction, because for years people have talked about competing with consumer brands, but I don't think students are necessarily comparing features. I think that they're comparing effort, and every great digital experience removes effort.
Yeah, and where their expectation for higher ed is, it's not unachievable. We just have to get that relevance. We have to get that personalization right and be thinking beyond the mail merge.
Well, 100%.
We don't have to be Netflix.
Exactly. It kind of harks back to what we were talking about earlier. The biggest shift is not technological, it's psychological. Students increasingly expect institutions to help them make sense of complexity, not simply providing access to information. I mean, information is abundant in, today.
Right. The
But
access to information is not anything now.
exactly, but guidance, now that's something that's more scarce. That's where I think institutions can really succeed over the next few years, is providing superb guidance.
All right, let's try to leave everybody with some practical takeaways from our conversation. So if an institution or a marketer wants to improve personalization efforts, like tomorrow, where are they going to start? What's your advice?
My first tip is to forget about personalization for a moment and actually to start focusing on where is the friction. Forget that it's a technology problem. Most people will look at CRM platforms, AI tools, automation workflows. The answer's not there. If you personalize a poor experience, you'll still have a poor experience. It'll just be personalized. Right. So I think
which might be worse.
Yeah. So now it's like you should be asking, where are students struggling today? Where are they dropping off? Where are they getting confused? Where are they repeatedly asking the same questions? Where are they losing confidence? Because those are the moments that are usually where the greatest opportunities exist. And I think once you start answering that question, whether that's with technology or not, that is where those great personalized experiences come from.
Is there a particular communication that comes to mind that sort of every institution does that you think should be looked at immediately?
Not one in particular, but there is almost like a topic, right? So I broaden it slightly. It's communication that happens immediately after a meaningful human interaction.
Okay.
So a good example might be an open house or a recruitment fair, campus tour, something like that. The reason being is that these are often the highest value interactions in the entire recruitment journey. We've seen repeatedly through our research that students love speaking with recruitment advisors. It's not hard to understand why, right? But a student leaves an incredibly valuable conversation, is often handed something generic, whether that's a standard brochure, a PDF, a generic follow-up email, and suddenly we've gone from highly personalized interactions to a largely impersonal experience. That, for me, that's the huge missed opportunity.
So let's pull this thread a little more. So you're also not saying that the expectation is after a student came to open house that they're expecting a 4-paragraph email in detail about every conversation they had while they were at the open house. That's not the expectation either. So where is that middle ground? What fits the mold for something like a post-open house communication that they would get? Is it more about the mindset we expect the student to be in now that they have just visited and experienced this, and addressing where they are now?
When I first started in my career, the thing that always came up when I was speaking to universities is they would always say to me, if we can just get this person on campus, they're so much more likely to convert.
Yeah, we all say that. It is true.
Right? And I think they are in that space, that headspace where emotionally they're like, wow, that was so cool. It was fantastic. I really love that. And that's when they're going to start to switch into that more analytical mindset. They're going to want that reassurance. They're going to want to build that trust. And I think it's understanding the sorts of questions and concerns that they have going into that mindset, and how you can present the right information to help them with those sorts of questions. So, what matters to them? What are they comparing? What are they concerned about? That's valuable insight. If you can position yourself to answer those questions after those human interactions, you'll build that trust and the relationship just soars from there.
I love it. Thank you. Let's end on a couple lightning round questions. So really quick answers. What's one personalization myth you'd love to retire?
That personalization means putting someone's first name in an email.
Right. What's the most overrated recruitment tactic?
Over-automated nurture campaigns.
Thank you for saying that. What's the most underrated recruitment tactic?
A great conversation with a human student recruitment advisor.
Now, you sort of said this in the beginning, but let's see if your answer stays the same. A brand outside higher ed that's doing personalization exceptionally well.
Google Maps.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better example.
A brand inside higher ed that's doing personalization exceptionally well.
I'm not sure whether you'll know this one necessarily,
That's okay.
but
We can look it up.
so there is this really great university here in the UK called UA92. I think they're one of the few institutions that I've seen that genuinely thinks differently about personalization. What's interesting isn't just like their use of technology, it's how they combine human interactions with digital experiences. They're quite a small institution. They'd be considered a challenger institution, I think. And what's cool is at student recruitment fairs, they don't hand out traditional view books. Instead, students receive a lanyard and a card that becomes the gateway to a personalized digital experience. But what's really, really cool about it is that the recruitment advisor writes the student's name on it by hand. And that's such a small thing, but there's something quite powerful about creating something together in the moment. It creates that sense of ownership and connection, and it gives everything that happens thereafter more meaning. And then from there, they have a digital view book experience, and it feeds information into their CRM. It creates personalized follow-up. It's got personalized information. Yeah, for me, that's what great personalization looks like. Not replacing human interactions with technology, using technology to extend the value of great human interactions.
Well, not exactly a lightning round answer, Nathan, but
Sorry.
I'm going to let it slide because it was the perfect way to wrap up the conversation. And what a great example that really tied together all the things that we chatted about. So thank you so much for a great conversation and being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to EduWeb.
And for our listeners, if this conversation made you rethink your own approach to recruitment communications, take a closer look at where your institution is creating confidence and clarity and trust for students, and where you might just be checking the personalization box. And make sure to share this podcast with a friend and recommend it.